Hello, hello, people. Welcome to the Takedown. Once again, this is the first Monday of every month we'll be doing this show, and I'm just glad to actually have you with me. I know Ben said something like you could have done a million things, but you chose to spend this time with us. I think that's an awesome thing. I always say I appreciate the time that people decide to give me because time is the one thing we'll never get back. So with that, let's go ahead and start off the Takedown with Nick, subverting power with radical thought. And the first thing I'm going to start off with today is just some questions. And I'm going to ask these questions because I want you to think about them when I start talking about some of the things I'm going to talk about today. First question is, do humans make logical decisions? And when I say logical, notice I didn't say rational. I didn't say rational because rational means in line with what's expected of you based on conditions of your social conditions. It could be whatever's normative behavior, right? So I didn't say rational, I said logical. And I want to separate the two. But do human beings generally make decisions for logical reasons? Now, I'm pretty sure it didn't even take you 5 seconds to say, yes or no, right? And then, of course, there's always going to be people who are saying, maybe not. There's, varying shades of gray. It's not necessarily a yes or no question. Okay, how about this next one? Are you too smart to be manipulated? Like, this is just a question. I mean, I'm going to tell you what I think, but I'm going to ask the questions first. And so the next question on top of that is, are you immune to propaganda? Can you spot it? Can you ferret it out easily and distinguish between what is the truth and what may just be propaganda? Can you do that all the time? If you think you can do it, how often do you think you do it? I don't know. Next question. Before Hillary Clinton was ever considered to be president, is that who you wanted to be president? Were you ready for a woman president before Hillary Clinton came along? Were you back in 1996 saying, what we really just need a woman president. That's what we need. That's going to help solve a lot of the problems that are going on with the United. We need a woman president. Is that what you were thinking? I'll even go as far as 2008. But in 2007 or 2006, were you thinking to yourself, man, what we really need? We need a black president. Did you even feel like something like that was possible? Why did you feel it was possible? Why did you feel it was impossible? Were you thinking to yourself, what we need, if only a black man could be president, then we would know this country was really going to change for the better? So some of these questions go back to a question that a friend told me that we need to start asking ourselves. How much of what we want, what we believe, and what we want to do is really independently about what we believe, what we want, and what we want to do? How much of that really comes from inside? How much of it really comes from outside? These are interesting questions. Now, I'm going to give you my answers to the first three because I think just right off the top of my head, number one, do humans always make logical decisions? Absolutely not. I mean, that's like an easy question. I kind of tried to go in order of difficulty, right? Like, of course, you already know, I'm sure you can think of people that just make crazy decisions based off of whatever, and it doesn't make any sense to you. And I'm sure you've made decisions, that other people may or may not agree with, and they don't understand why you make the decisions you make. So that's right off the bat. Of course, humans don't make logical decisions. And if we do, make decisions based upon logic, it's our own logic, it's personal. And that could be anything. Second question, are you too smart to be manipulated? Now, this is tricky because a lot of people do believe in general that because you are smart, you are harder to manipulate. But, there's a saying, a con man loves a person who thinks they're too smart to be conned. If you think you're too smart to be conned, you're even easier to con than somebody who's looking and expecting to be conned because they know they're susceptible to it. So, one thing just going forward we have to understand is nobody's immune to propaganda. Nobody has you know, been inoculated to where things just don't work on them. And propaganda is not so simple as like one thing just catches everybody. It's layered. There's different propaganda, you know, kind of like catered to a specific type of person. And to say that every person is unique and we don't share similarities or think similarly to other people is wrong, because we all grow up, you know, in a situation where we share common experiences, we share, you know, common lifestyles, we have things in common, things that group us. And based on those groups, there's a specific thing or a specific argument that they can make to you or your group that will work for that group, but may not work for another group. You know, it's almost as if you need to speak a different language when you're speaking to certain groups than speaking to other groups. And what does that sound like? That just sounds like politics, right? That sounds like catering your message to certain individuals or certain groups of individuals, because that's where, you know, that's really where you get to influence people. So I'm asking these questions because I'm going to basically try to talk about things and get us to really start thinking about why we make the decisions we make, why we feel the way we feel, and where our kind of like where our stuff kind of falls. Because, you know, when people make products, or when people are marketing politicians, or when politicians are up there and they're selling their brand, we have to understand that that stuff is manufactured. You know, when you watch these people and you hear their life stories, how they came up from this and they experienced that and that changed them. These stories are shaped. They're shaped to make you see this person in a certain light. We'll never know what Barack Obama really thinks about ordinary people, because we don't know the man. We don't know him personally. All we know is the image that's put in front of us. We'll never really know what they really feel on the inside and all of that. And because we don't really know, how right is it of us to really judge them on a personal level? Like, once you start trying to read into someone's mind, once you start trying to make your decisions based off of that, based off of what's shown to you or what's fed to you, you know, on a daily basis, it doesn't even matter if it's from trusted sources. We really just don't know what people really think on the inside. We don't have a mind. We don't have a device that lets us read into people's minds. And so I ask these questions. Do we believe that people make products that people want, that people make politicians that people want, that people make politics and policy that people want? Or do we believe that people or we're made to like policy, or we're made to want certain policy, you know, or we're made to want products? You know, where is the line really, really drawn? And look, I'm not a psychology person. I'm not really trying to go like really deep and try to tell you the psychoanalytics of what's going on and all that. All I want you to do is to take one thing from this whole little segment that I've just done with these couple of questions that I've asked. And that one thing is, examine why you believe certain things and examine where it comes from, and try to see, can you find a logical reasoning for it? Now, maybe your reasoning may be sound, maybe not. Maybe other people may see a different perspective, but try to open yourself up to the possibility that you could be wrong. And not only that, the possibility that maybe it's shaped by your stimuli that you receive. And then maybe on top of that, that stimuli is put out there to make you feel that way. You know, we're emotional creatures, all of us. Nobody is without being able to have an emotional response based on what's happening to them. And, you know, since basically as old as time, as old as civilization itself, there have been basically methods to control people. And one of those is propaganda. Now, back in the day, if you didn't think a certain way, or if you didn't do certain things, there were ways to deal with those people. You could, I don't know, kill them. You could have them, you know, ostracized from society, lock them out from the group. You know, those are kind of soft forms, right? But then you can also have, well, I guess the killing them is not necessarily a soft form, but I'm thinking of ostracization. That's sort of like a soft form, but you have harder forms like straight force. Like, you either do this or die, or we'll come in and kill everybody and enslave you and all that. You know, it's like a coercion by force. But then as time goes on, they realize, force may not be the best way. So what's the method? When it's not okay to just wantonly exert force on people out in the streets, what's the method that we would use to control people? What would be the method that you would use to maintain a cohesive society? The number one question is thought control. But how can you control so many different people's thoughts? They all think different things. Like, there's no way to keep everybody in like a bound. Well, yeah, there is. Basically, it's almost like an indoctrination. And I'm not saying that everything that you see is some plot by somebody to control your mind. It's not necessarily like that. It's there's a lot of moving parts, but it coalesces itself in a band. And that band expresses itself in many different ways. It could be, let me use an example. They talk about how Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in the primary, that they were saying that, well, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders agree on 98% of the issues. And I was saying, well, no, that's not what's happening. What's happening is on bills that make it out of committee, and actually first that get to Congress and make it out of committee and actually get a vote on the floor of that very narrow view of bills, they agreed on 98% of those. So if you go into a supermarket and you're restricted to an aisle and you and somebody else pick from that one aisle in the supermarket 98% of the same items, does that mean that you guys are ideologically the same, or that your tastes throughout the entire store are going to be similar because you picked 98% of things from this one narrow aisle? Let's expand it to political conversation. So inside of the policies that are actually get a vote on the floor in Congress, they agreed on 98% of the things, but that doesn't mean that they're ideologically the same. That just means within that narrow bound of conversation, or within the narrow bound of options that were available there, they voted in similar ways. But they're still vastly different politicians. I would even argue that Bernie Sanders is still even vastly different from maybe myself or even Jill Stein or some of the other voices out there. So what we're dealing with is we have things that a state or a power structure uses to sort of perpetuate itself. And that doesn't necessarily exclude, thought control by what I'm saying. And it's not necessarily all in line and all going in one direction. So I just want to get that out of the way, because I don't want to sound like I believe that, there's people sitting in the back room deciding this is how people are supposed to think. That's not quite how it works. It's subtle, but it's also just as effective. And I'm going to use an example. We all know, most of the people watching this show know that mainstream media is pretty bad. But if we know that it's bad, why do we still reference it as a place for our news? Like, as if what they're telling us is a good place to start looking for the truth. That's where we go. We go to mainstream outlets. Now, let's say you go to independent outlets. We go to the biggest independent outlets. And there's some reasons that you can say that that's okay, right? They have resources where they can vet the sources of information and things of that nature. But at a certain point, you have to understand that they're not the full range of all the news that occurs in this world. Well, we don't know. Like, before, that's where people got most of their news from. Now you have the internet that's sort of democratizing news dissemination. But what do you see? You see, strange efforts and, movements to try to clamp some of that down, whether it's via trying to slander news sites by calling them fake news sites, trying to censor what information gets out there in one way or another, trying to use like red baiting to try to say, well, this information is not really true because it came from a questionable source. Now you're starting to see, the state trying to react to this new broadening of information brought out by the internet. And it's taken them a long time to do so because the internet's not locked down. But think about this. When we saw, I'm going to use Vietnam for an example, because I think using things of today is still too debatable, right? I'll use Vietnam. In Vietnam, the media really flexed a lot of power in helping turn the public sentiment against the war. It was really hard to defend, the policy when you saw all of that wanton death and destruction on TV every day, showing these clips in the newspaper of just, bodies in trenches and talking about the death and destruction that was wrought in that conflict. It was really hard to maintain public support for those policies. But I want to let you guys know that there was no image. There were not mainstream dissenting voices to the Vietnam War for the first 5 years that it went on. Why did it take 5 years for any of those images to get over to the United States? You know why it took 5 years? Because basically the press either self-censored or the government coerced the press to censor those images, to not show those images. Those images were not shown until policy was getting ready to already be changed. And if you look at that example, that just shows you the mainstream media sort of working as the propaganda arm of the United States government. We can go back to World War I, where Woodrow Wilson created the Creole Commission, and its purpose was to basically ramp up nationalism and patriotism to gin up support for the war and to squash dissent. Like, that was generally what it was meant to do. And they employed they employed a person in psychology to kind of help, come up with theories and come up with, a means and a basis so that they could actually achieve these goals. So we know that the state uses propaganda for its own ends. So when we know that the state is using propaganda for its own ends, why then are we looking to the media institutions as though they're the bound for where the truth may be? As though they were the stories that they decide to cover should be the stories that we decide to cover. I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. That's a question I'm asking to the viewers, and I'm going to take an actual look and see if anybody is kind of responding to some of the questions I'm asking today, because I don't have all the answers. I'm not here to feed you my answers. I'm going to tell you what I think and why I think that way, and you guys can basically, take it or leave it. Maybe it brought something new to you that maybe you may think a little bit differently. Maybe it inspires you to think a certain way about a different situation. But this is just something I want everybody to think about. Now, somebody says the first engagement between the U.S. forces and the Vietnamese was in 1965, and by 1968, and the Tet Offensive had full media coverage. So maybe 5 years is not accurate. So I will actually go back and check to make sure my year amount was accurate. But I know that the war had raged on for quite some time before. And remember what I said, dissenting media voices actually appearing in the mainstream media, not people, showing, whatever it was in support of the war, actually showing like the horrors of it from the very beginning. And I'm just not 100% sure that actually happened from the moment the war started. Now, challenge me on that. I guarantee you we'll find out the answer of it. We'll go back and look into that. But this is what the mainstream media does. Like, there are people who own these media institutions, and they have a vested interest in certain messages being out there. And I think we all understand that. But when we understand that, do we also take that understanding and apply it? Do we also take that understanding and apply it to when we're actually looking at stories that we say, okay, why is this put this certain way? And I think maybe we do it in some instances, but not in others. So it's very inconsistent in our application. And I understand not all situations are the same, but I think it's something that we should probably start doing. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at these comments here, because I really want you guys to be engaged in this conversation, because these are really just my thoughts. Today I'm really going to be kind of giving you a hodgepodge of my thoughts, and then I'm going to show you where I'm going with it. Another example. In say Iraq, how many times did we see images, or even Afghanistan? How many times have we seen images of Afghanistan before the United States military conflict there, and then after? How many times have we seen, like, the before and after, so we can see cause and effect? How often do they show that on mainstream media? Like we saw, like, in Iraq, the statue being pulled down. But how often did they show, like, how a lot of the water systems have been destroyed, and now food and water insecurity are raging out of control? How they had, rudimentary, yes, but they had some infrastructure. But then after the war, they virtually had no infrastructure. They had been, basically put back almost in the dark ages. How often do our media institutions show that and really talk about that in any type of critical way? I find that most of the anti-war coverage here in America is kind of bounded by, I guess Benjamin Studebaker said it best. He said it's really more about caution. It's like saying, hey, when we did these things, we didn't do them for bad reasons or for alternative reasons. We were trying to do good, and it just didn't work out. And it's like, well, how often throughout history do you have to keep going through that and then keep saying the same thing? Like, oh, well, we went in with good intentions, but it just didn't work out. It's like, how many times can you say that? If you told your kid to go out there and cut the grass, and he went out there with good intentions, but it just didn't work out, and he came back inside, like, would you let that fly? And I'm not saying that we're the government's parents, but at a certain point, the government does rely on the consent of the governed, right? To say that public opinion doesn't matter, which is say that all these millions of dollars that they waste on manipulating the way we think in subtle and not so subtle ways, that all that's for nothing, because it doesn't matter. They just do whatever they want to do. That's the key. They can't just do whatever they want to do. If they could just do whatever they want to do all the time without end, then why bother going through all the methods of control that they use? Why bother going through all that? They bother with it because it's necessary. And you can see the difference. As the public becomes more involved and more anti-war, the policies of war actually change. Maybe they may not change in result, but they change form to respond to that increased public awareness. So before, you could have full-scale invasions and people may not complain too much. Then all of a sudden, people start complaining about the life lost and things of that nature. So now you use covert action. Use the CIA to overthrow leaders and to conduct things. But as people get hip to that, you change it from that to drone wars. You call it terrorism. You don't call it necessarily rebelling against a state or doing anything. You call it terrorism. And now you use drones so that there's no no American life at risk. No American life, that's really no American skin in the game. But I'm wondering, if we didn't have if we didn't have that new public awareness of the issue and public pushback on those things, would the United States have even bothered doing that way at all? Would they even bother changing the nature of it? Or would it be exactly what it was in the earlier part of the 20th century? I believe that public sentiment does matter. Public opinion does matter. Now, sometimes that a public opinion can be, well, I believe in this, but I'm just not going to support actually doing anything to bring about what I believe. And that could be someone who says, like, I believe in universal health care, but I don't believe I should vote for people who offer universal health care as a part of their platform because it may not be realistic. It may not be, something that I can foresee happening. And the question is, well, why do you feel that it's something that you can't foresee happening? What is holding us back from actually getting that? And truth be told, the answer is people not really feeling like they should probably vote based on that. They want to vote based on what they think is possible. But where did what was possible? Where did that expectation of what is possible from our political system, where did it come from? It didn't come from out of nowhere. It didn't come from out of thin air. Was universal health care impossible before they told you it was impossible? Or was it just always impossible? And, in a democracy, you just can't get things because they're not possible. If you really have a democracy, you can get whatever you want. All you have to do is get other people to agree with you. And really, you have to battle for those ideas in the arena, in the social. You have to fight that social battle to get people to agree. And then not only to agree, to want to act on those things to get that change happening. So I just want to kind of get that out of there before I say this. The mainstream media, for the most part, is a 24-hour nonstop propaganda engine. It just is. It doesn't open up the dialogue to question things. It doesn't give dissenting voices a fair platform to compete for ideas. It just doesn't do that because it's not interested in doing that. What its goal is to show you a narrow debate where you have the illusion of choices between A or B, and you don't even think that there could be a C or a D or an E. Those things are all things that you should be considering when you look to the mainstream media. Now, I want to talk about something a little bit bigger. I kind of went all over the place when I'm talking about the media, and that's because there's so many examples of where the media is just out of control. And I think we need to understand what it's doing so we can better try to resist just going with a gut instinct without really thinking about where that gut instinct may have come from. And when I talk to people about this, a lot of times they'll say, well, no, my thoughts are my own. And it's just like, well, yeah, they are your thoughts and they are your own, but they don't exist in the vacuum. They just didn't come out of thin air. Your imagination didn't even just come out of thin air. It's based off of what you've read, what you've heard, what you've heard from other people. All those things have an impact. It's like a feedback. You have your own internal thoughts, but you're constantly receiving stimuli, and that readjusts how you think internally. And so those things they play a role. So just saying you're an independent person and that, your thoughts are your own, it's just not quite accurate. It's just not dealing in reality in a sense, because we have to understand how we think and how we do things and make decisions. And that's why I asked those questions at the very beginning. So now I'm going to talk about the recount. And the reason why I spent all that time talking about the media before I went to the recount is because, once again, the mainstream media has done us a little bit of a disservice here. Because when people talk about the recount, mostly what they're talking about is whether or not it's going to change the result. What are the motivations behind it? Who's paying for it? And to me, all of those considerations, what states were chosen, to me, those questions are noise. The big takeaway from the recount is there are millions of people who believe that our elections are basically free and fair and open, verifiable and accurate. Now, there are people who believe that it's free, fair, and open, or verifiable and accurate, but they may have some grievances. Like they say, okay, the suppression is really bad and the suppression shouldn't be happening. Or, okay, they disenfranchise this group or that group, but the actual tally itself is correct and accurate. And what I would say to you is, based off of what you know that they're limiting who can vote. They're excluding people from the vote. They're changing the vote hours. They're arbitrarily throwing out votes. They would do all of these things to manipulate the outcome of the election. But somehow they would do all of this manipulation through the media, through tampering with the voter rolls, all these things. They would do all that. But somehow they'll do all those things. And then right when it comes down to talking about the actual vote count, that's sacred. That's never been touched by anyone. That's 100% untouchable. You know, and I think that's it's almost dishonest. So where are we there? Just following it out logically. You know, I know, you know, we want to believe in the good of the world. We want to believe that our system works and that it responds. But when you start thinking about how there was that study that showed that the United States is not necessarily a democracy and that public opinion has very little to do with policy, only when there is a faction of elites that have power and money behind them, when they agree with a particular group in the United States, does that policy reflect the interests of that group? You know, when you start thinking about our election system as sometimes unverifiable or sometimes very unfair, or it just operates very inefficient, you know, when you start putting, you know, all the allegorical evidence together, you know, it starts to make sense. Because you have to ask yourself, how is it that in a country where, you know, 60% of people believe we should have a universal healthcare system, we just don't have one? We can't get one. It's never going to happen, according to Hillary Clinton. You know, it's never going to happen. That's a pipe dream. Bernie Sanders is selling false promises. How is it that all those people, you know, when that is the public sentiment, that has not reflected itself in policy? How is it that all that is public sentiment? How does that happen if you have a fully fair and accurate voting an election system, a fully functioning and open political process? How is it that these majoritarian ideas never manifest themselves into policy? That's a question. Now, back to the recount. She's scamming people. Why did the amount change that she was asking for? You know, these are questions I said they were noise earlier, but they all serve a particular purpose. One way or another, their goal is to get you to not pay attention to the fact that if this actually goes through, this would show evidence to even the most objective watcher that there is something wrong with our election system in the states that were chosen. Now, anybody who's trying to think it out logically would say, hey, if it happened in this state and that state and that state, perhaps it may be happening in more states. Now it gives credibility to the activists and individuals who may have been trying to study the issue, but just weren't getting any traction because people just didn't want to believe what they had to say. No matter how much evidence they had to be ready to believe that. You know, they had that the expectation was that that's, you know, kooky and it's a conspiracy theory. Therefore, no matter what amount of evidence you brought, it's all going to be, well, that's just speculation. You know, this is just how we have to kind of look at this and how it kind of works out in that way. These questions kind of play into that. They're almost distracting and almost misdirecting you from something that may actually be something we need to focus on and really take seriously. So when Jill Stein did this, you know, I wanted to be noted, you know, the first question, you know, well, why did they pick those states? Well, I don't think Jill Stein actually picked those states personally. I think this was actually something started by people from over at Election Justice and Election Integrity who were monitoring the election results and said that those results were highly inaccurate and that they were multiple inconsistencies in what the recorded vote was, and you know, some other tools that they use to kind of verify whether or not our election is within a margin of error of what's expected. So she didn't personally pick those states. Now, the other thing about them saying, you know, she's scamming people, supposedly the Federal Board of Elections actually has some sort of criterion on when people are raising money to challenge recounts, and that money goes into a special fund and it can't be used for other things. So it's not as if the Green Party is getting all of this money to somehow further their candidates. You know, I think I heard that one quite often. And then they start asking things like, well, why now? And, you know, this happened in the primary. Well, you know, a Green Party person doesn't really have standing to challenge an election result in an election that they're not in. So why would a Green Party person challenge an election result in a Democratic primary? That seems kind of strange to me. So I think that question just doesn't even make sense on the face of it. So I'm kind of trying to parse through this and kind of just show my thoughts on it. I want to hear what you guys think about it, because this is not set in stone. These are just my thoughts, and I've kind of thought about it, and I've sat down and taken some time to take a look at some of the common things that I'm hearing, and we can kind of parse through that. I believe that, somebody's intention or what you perceive their intentions to be matter less than what they're actually doing. So if you're hungry on the side of the street and somebody offers you a sandwich, now I'm not saying, the sandwich is poison and they're trying to kill you or something like that. They just offer you a sandwich, a normal sandwich, or they offer you money to buy the food. Do you care? Do you care why they're giving you that money? Does it matter to you materially? Does it materially matter to you if someone's trying to do you a favor, why they're trying to do that favor? Some instances you can say maybe they want power over you, maybe they want to do this. Okay, I'm just saying at a base matter, you're hungry today and somebody offers you food and you eat that food and it's not poisonous, it's not bad, they don't ask for anything for it. Does it matter why they did it, or does it matter that they did it to you materially? So this belief that, Jill Stein is doing this all for her, and that, this is just a political game and they're all into this for popularity and all that. Jill Stein has not received really good, positive press from the mainstream media this entire time that she's been in the political game. This idea that she's doing this to build up her brand, and at the same time she's building up her brand, but she's damaged the Green Party beyond repair, that's not even consistent thought. If she's building her brand, then the Green Party by extension would benefit from her being all out there, face plastered everywhere doing stuff. If she's damaging the Green Party, then she can't be doing all this for vanity, because she's damaging the Green Party and her own stature by doing these things. So you can't have those two narratives at the same time, because it doesn't make sense. She's doing this for self and she's building her own brand. Building it up for what? To do what? Definitely not helping the Green Party. If she's damaging her own name and she's damaging the Green Party, then she's not doing it for some reason where she can make a whole bunch of money and turn this into something, because it looks like it's all negative. So I just wanted to kind of just talk about my thoughts on those common criticisms. But remember, ultimately, the most important thing here is going to be not necessarily trying to change the result of the election. That's another one that, if she does this, this might change the result of the election to Hillary Clinton. It doesn't matter who the actual election goes to. If this changes the result of the election to Hillary Clinton, if she really did win, guess what? She won. She deserves to be president. Even if I don't like it, if Donald Trump won, guess what? He deserves to be president. He won the freaking election. That's how it works. This whole idea like, okay, well, if it changes it to Hillary, then we shouldn't support it, or this. We should support an open and free election process, regardless of what the outcome may be. That's what democracy is. And the idea that we shouldn't support having a fair and accountable verification of the election result because it may change it to one person or another is wrong. So I'm going to take a second again and just kind of see what people are saying about this, and kind of just see what they think. Okay, so look, Mark P says decisions should be made on what's possible, not what you know for sure is happening. Lack of transparency, electronic voting, etc., makes election fraud more possible, so it's wrong. I agree with that. That's the argument I'm saying. I said that, if the process is open and everybody can see it, it's a lot harder to basically have a culture of fraud, or have the possibility where things can be manipulated, than if you have it kind of closed door and it's kind of dark, and when people try to go verify, this it's all happening behind closed doors, and they're reading the tallies behind closed doors. It should be all open. They're not passing ballots under the table like in Chicago. People aren't mysteriously being purged off the rolls in Brooklyn and Arizona. They're not closing down polling place. All that stuff is a means by which people can affect the election result. And to say that they're doing all that, but there's nothing going on, that the elections are free and fair and open and accurate. It's just, you're not connecting the dots. It's not to say that you may not understand each of these things are separately happening, but you're not connecting them together and making a conclusion that's based off of taking in all of those separate things and saying, okay, all of these things are happening. So perhaps it's not unreasonable to say that there may be manipulation going on. Oh, and then when you look at it and say, okay, it's definitely possible to happen with the system we have now, perhaps we should make it such that it's not possible for that to be happening, or less possible for it to be happening in the future. And so the last part I want to talk about is when I say like enhancing democracy. Like, to me, the election recount really is about, providing a future for enhancing democracy. I just spoke about how public sentiment is so far removed from what the actual policy is. That just shows you that the political system is largely not democratic. Perhaps we need to enhance democracy. Maybe it's by getting people more engaged in the process. Maybe it's by getting people to understand that they're not powerless. I hear a lot that people call the left powerless, or that small people are powerless. Not necessarily, because if they're powerless, there wouldn't be so much money involved in trying to make you feel like you're powerless. So I kind of lost my train of thought right there. But basically, when you get down to things like protecting the vote and ensuring that it's accurate and verifiable, that's a way of enhancing democracy. Because now, you don't have to necessarily maybe get 70% of the population to agree with you before you can start electing, politicians, or having politicians actually act upon those whims. Now you may need, 51%, which is what it should be. It should be like, hey, if 51% feel this, and they're willing to hold pressure on their elected officials, regardless of what party they're in, that should eventually matriculate its way into the actual policymaking arena. But that's not what happens now. You have a situation where you may need to overcome, some mysterious shadow factor that we can't even quantify. And I remember the election justice people were saying, that, possibly Donald Trump may have won more votes than what's reported, or, Greg Palast is saying that Hillary Clinton may have won more votes because of Republican cheating or their usual tactics. My thing is, if you are unsure, you're both sure that the cheat has occurred, but nobody knows which direction it went and how much, we're already in a very, very, very dark place as far as accuracy and verifiability is concerned. And I think in a democracy, those two things are sacred, and they have to be fought for and protected 100%. So just moving that forward, we shouldn't have to guess how much fraud occurred and which direction it went, because that's not where you want to be. Back to enhancing democracy. The election recount, like I said before, is a good step in making sure that we don't have to fight on uneven footing. We can just fight in the realm of ideas, and we just have to battle against propaganda to get people to agree with us, and not only agree with us, to turn that agreement into action. But when we think about, okay, enhancing democracy, what does that mean? Remember that this country was not founded per se on democracy. We all get this, every person, all men are created equal unless you're a woman or you don't have property and you're not white. There was a lot of stipulations on there, and it was designed as a system to protect the powerful from the masses. That's what it was designed specifically to do. Every person that was in the Constitutional Congress, every single one of them agreed that democracy was not what they wanted to achieve. And what was that? John Jay, the head of the Constitutional Congress, said the people who own the country ought to govern it. I mean, do we remember that? The framers were not trying to create a democracy. They were trying to create some sort of preferential treatment for a enlightened few who had property, who had the most stake in society, who owned society. That's what they were trying to create, and that's what they did. And then when those people had that power, they used that power to kind of change the system every so often. Whenever there's, stuff going on, they change the system, change it, tweak it here and there so that it survives from generation to generation to generation. Because some generations aren't just going to take what was there before. The idea that, oppression has to have the same form that it's always had is just as silly as the idea that resistance is always going to have the same form that it's always had from generation to generation. I talk about this a lot, but I say Thomas Jefferson said that the idea of the Constitution or how the government was set up, the idea that it would be unchanging and just be rigid is a silly idea. It's no smarter than, a man putting on the coat size for a boy. That was his idea of how government was supposed to work. And, not to say that he envisioned that when he said government or it's supposed to respond to the changing of the times, that's not to say he included everybody in who's supposed to make the decision on if it's good or not for everybody. But that's saying he did understand that things change over time from generation to generation. He also felt that treaties, I know Donald Trump talks about treaties, he also felt that treaties should have to be re-ratified. It seems kind of strange that we're locked into treaties that, somebody may have signed 100 years ago. Shouldn't treaties have to be renegotiated and re-ratified for a new generation every 10 or 20 years to allow the next generation who has to live under that treaty, or to allow people who have to live under that treaty who may not have previously, or people who want to rethink their decision of the treaty, actually get a chance to have their say. I think that that's something important. James Madison, he actually lived long enough to watch what they implemented in practice. And he said, what did he say? He said he deplored the depravity of the times or something like that, something along those lines. But he basically realized that in his mind, when they were framing the Constitution, they figured that elite few would be benevolent gentlemen who would be, ruling on behalf of everybody with everybody's best interests at heart. But he actually lived long enough to see that that's actually not what happened, that belief was a pipe dream. So now we have what we have here today, where, many of those things that were put in place back then are still in effect, or they've evolved, but their function remains the same. You have an elite group of people that basically have a lot of power and influence, not just over government, but even over the way certain people think, even the way we live. And they're still exerting that influence for their own purposes. And one purpose may be controlling the way you think. One purpose may be making you want a certain product. It may be saying like, oh, well, that's a conspiracy theory, so I'm not going to do that. Or, oh, that's not good, so let's not go that way. Let's not put our thoughts into practice. Or, oh, hey, this is unreasonable. This is unrealistic. So let's not actually try to vote based on these ideals or morals. All of that stuff ties in together. None of it exists in a vacuum. And a reason why I want to go back and just kind of throw some thoughts out there is just I'm trying to kind of show you guys kind of where I get this stuff from, kind of like how I come to some of the conclusions I come to, the way I think. Maybe it's a way of thinking you're already familiar with and you're already well on your way there. More than likely you are if you're watching my show. Maybe not. But I just wanted you to think about it and just know where it comes from and know that I just don't pull it out of thin air. Now, generally, I'm already out of my time. But as you know, once I start ranting, I go over all the time. So I want to go ahead and call the show there. And we'll actually pick up this maybe next time. I'm actually going to have a special this month. I know it's the holidays and everybody wants to get to that, but I'm going to try to have one extra show this month, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us.